I was in sixth form when I first heard about the greenmile, so I'd have been about 16 or 17. We were in the computer room and my friend had seen it the night before and he was trying to explain the film to me and I couldn't understand what he was going on about. The Green Mile isn't an easy film to explain without it sounding either ridiculous or like some Christian propaganda film. It's about a prisoner on death row who has healing powers. He heals Tom Hanks' urinary infection, he brings a mouse back to life, and he removes the tumour from the warden's wife, but it still gets executed. Does that explain it? Or it's about racism during the Great Depression and how this black man universally hated and feared turns out to be the modern version of Jesus, plus a few comedic hijinks where the villains of the piece get their comeuppance. You know, I mean, I'm being flippant, but you see what I mean. It all sounds a bit far-fetched when you explain it, and perhaps that's part of what's interesting about the film, because when you watch it, none of it does feel far-fetched. For an hour or so, things run as a pretty ordinary prison film, then, out of nowhere, John Coffey grabs Paul Edgecombe's nuts, the lights explode, he coughs up a load of insects, and the film takes a very mystical turn. That happens, and you don't roll your eyes or doubt the film, you believe it entirely. So this is going to be a short video, and I've essentially framed it as a lesson for writers, because this whole point is something I feel a lot of writers fail to understand about stories. Sometimes, the less you explain, the more believable it feels. I mean, the obvious example of that is Star Wars. The Force was never explained beyond some vague power running through the universe, and we all accepted it. Then we get given an explanation about midichlorians, and I mean, just leave off it, George Lucas. If this scene with Paul's infection being healed was followed by a long explanation from John Coffey where we're informed about how he got his gift, how it works, why he coughs up the bugs, why the lights smash, the suspension of disbelief would start to snap. And there's 3 reasons too much explanation might make it snap. First, because exposition like that always sidesteps the plot slightly. You know, suddenly that's put on hold, suddenly the characters are learning and explaining more than they just need to know for the film to run smoothly and for the characters to develop. That much should be obvious. If exposition isn't subtle, it temporarily derails the story and reminds the audience this isn't a living, breathing world they've dived into, but it is a work of fiction with its writer sitting right there, currently shoveling information into your ear. Secondly though, because just like with anything, when you explain and justify your arguments too much, it actually starts to seem weaker because by devoting so much time to explain it, it suggests you yourself don't think it can stand on its own 2 feet. The clearest example for me of this is lying. As a kid, my first job was a waiter. I was terrible at it, but one day I needed to pull a sickie, I can't remember why, so I rang and I explained to my boss that I couldn't make it in because I was ill. And then I added a load of extra description. You know, I wasn't feeling great last night, but I tried to get up in the morning and it wasn't working, I threw up, I kept sweating and shivering, all that kind of stuff. And I imagine it made him think, why is he explaining so much? Does he not think anyone will believe him? Why would he think that? Must be because he's lying. Whereas, the lesson I learned is explain less and it makes you seem more confident in what you're saying. If it seems like you expect to be believed, then you're more likely to be believed. And so that is true with telling stories as well. Justify, but don't over-justify. And the third reason is because vagueness can be a great tool for giving your story a mystical quality. I mean, you need powerful imagery as well, not necessarily metaphorical imagery, but interesting and striking enough that it kind of poses a little riddle for you. Suddenly it's a bonus that everything hasn't been explained because you now get to have your own interpretations about why and what it means. Suddenly you're being teased with imagery, feeling, there's something meaningful about this stuff on camera. I want to make sense of it. Or maybe, if you can't be bothered to make sense of it, there's something meaningful about this stuff on camera. That's really cool. Put simply, we can roughly guess why John Coffey coughs up insects, but if it was clearly explained to us, it would kind of lose its magic as a symbol. And so the moment of John grabbing Paul's nuts and coughing up insects isn't followed with any explanation. Paul doesn't really even ask what John did, he just goes to the toilet, then it cuts to him back at home, to him banging his wife, and then the next scene is him visiting Gary Sinise. John Coffey drops out of the story for a while after this moment. And what's clever about this as well is that it gives us time to form our own ideas about how John Coffey is able to heal people from urinary infections. This scene we get with Paul right here slows the plot right down and has him also forming his own opinions. He starts to question whether John Coffey really did murder those two girls. As such, when the story does come back to John Coffey, Paul has had time to form his own explanation that John is a gift from God, a miracle. I mean, see the difference there? Rather than explaining both to Paul and us how John is able to do this stuff, the story instead gives Paul and us space to make sense of it for ourselves. Then, when we come back, no explanations are even needed. And so very little is ever explained in this film. Why does he cough up insects? Where does John come from? What did he do? Who else did he help before the events here? It's never pointed out that his initials are the same as Jesus Christ. It's never explained how his powers work, and although Paul calls him a gift from God, it's not even entirely clear if John Coffey is a Christian himself, so we don't know. The only 2 points where explanations are really made is first when John shows Paul how the two girls were murdered.
I got to, boss. I got to give you a little bit of myself. A gift. A gift of what's inside of me, so you can see for yourself.
Which is one of the few lines in this film I personally don't like because it does go against everything I've just said. Explanation here is necessary set up for the later plot point of why Paul has lived so long, but it's explained a little too clearly, I think. It's a bit at odds with John Coffey as a character also, who isn't very articulate. And the second place where real explanation is made is Paul elaborating on this same point to Ellie.
When John did that, when he took my hand, a part of the power that worked through him spilled into me.
But here it works better because we don't know for sure. This is just Paul's interpretation. It's most likely the right one, but because it's told through the lens of Paul trying to find the most logical conclusion for something he doesn't fully understand, we doubt it less. It's much more subtle and less like exposition solely for ours and Ellie's sake, because it's also Paul's attempt to try and understand the events of his life, trying to make sense of what's happened to him. And then the final few minutes of the film are Paul's attempts to make sense of what it all means. In his eyes, his long life is a punishment for killing one of God's miracles. Is that true? Has Paul got it all wrong? We don't know. He doesn't know. This is just how he feels about it. His long life becomes atonement as he slowly withers towards the imagined ending, walking his own very long green mile. The majesty of this film comes precisely from its lack of clarity, from its elusiveness. We believe because we're not forced to believe. That's one big lesson I'd say writers can draw from the Green Mile. Don't force your audience to believe, just give them space alongside the characters to make up their own minds.